We've become familiar with the story. A big industrial employer pulls out of a small town. The human impact, the local concentration of pain, is terrible to witness.
We got devastated, to be honest with you, but we all expected it, but not so soon.
Yeah, a bit gutted. I've done 30 years service, so, but then again, nothing's forever.
1,700 jobs are due to go here by autumn 2020. That's in a South Wales county with around 145,000 people in it. So that's 1 in 100 of the population directly affected. And of course, that doesn't include all the workers for supplier companies and all the local businesses, all the cafes, all the restaurants, all the pubs. Jeremy Davis has run the 2 brewers in Bridgend for 4 years, and he says the closure will hurt more than local car workers. How concerned are you, though, when it comes, personally concerned are you for your business over the closure?
Oh, I'm massively concerned. You know, obviously, I think they're giving them 12, 14 months. I think it's end of summer next year when the plant will shut. If you're losing 1,500 highly paid jobs, there's a lot of money that can be spent in the community that's not going to be there anymore.
What's going on? Well, there are global forces at work. The international car industry is being battered by a hurricane. Car manufacturing jobs are being cut across the world. Demand from China, the largest car market in the world, is slowing. The impact of the diesel emissions scandal continues to crush sales of those vehicles, and companies are scrambling to prepare for the mass shift to electric vehicles. Then there's the vicious sideswipe of Donald Trump's trade war. And Brexit? Well, they said it wasn't a factor today, but Ford has actually been the most explicit of all the multinational car manufacturers operating here in the UK in warning how damaging it will be for the UK to be outside the single market and outside the customs union. Catastrophic was how Ford described the prospect of a no-deal Brexit in February. So what's the problem? Ford exports the engines it manufactures at Bridgend and also from its Dagenham engine plant to mainland Europe for assembly into finished cars. Those finished cars are then re-exported back to the UK for sale. Just consider the impact of the sudden imposition of EU tariffs on UK engine exports on that business model. Consider the impact of UK tariffs on car imports. It's for reasons like this that industry representatives describe Brexit as a potential existential threat to UK automotive manufacturers. The head of Ford Europe said today that this action has nothing to do with Brexit, but the local union leadership doesn't believe it.
Well, the company is saying that it's not a factor at all. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that. Within the last 2 years, we've had conversations with Bridgend Ford about the potential impact upon their goods because of tariffs and potential no-deal Brexit. So, you know, it might not be the only consideration, but we definitely believe that it's a contributing factor.
Whatever the cause, damage is already being felt. Investment in the UK automotive sector plunged by 50% last year. Production, 1.5 million cars, was the lowest for 5 years.
We got blackcurrant and raspberry.
Back at the 2 brewers, we find Julie Jones and her daughter Emily. Julie moved to Bridgend in 1977, the same year the plant opened.
It was a very big shock because I think there's been a few times where the factories announced sort of job losses or closures and it hasn't happened. But now that it is, it's devastating really. And for elderly people who've been there all their life, what happens to those? You know, it's all they've known is that factory. It's going to have a huge impact on the town.
Because it's not just Bridgend, but it's, you know, it is everywhere, and you're kind of thinking, well, what does the future hold? It's a bit worrying, I think, at the moment, especially with young children.
The Brexit blame game will continue. For the people around here, wherever it came from, the harm is done.
Ben Chu, we're joined now by Richard Harrington, a Minister for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy until he resigned over Brexit in March this year. Adam Price is the leader for Plaid Cymru, and Kate Andrews, the Associate Director for the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Good evening to you all. First of all, Adam Price, inevitable with an economic slowdown. It was the case that even in Germany, massive reduction in manufacturing of cars. This is a global problem.
Well, it's certainly true, isn't it, that the car industry, more than probably any other sector at the moment, is going through a rapid and accelerating period of structural change. What's happened here as well, though, is that's happened at a time when politics, if you like, are slowed down to a standstill. And I think those two forces have come together. So compare and contrast, if you like, when Tata 3 years ago, and the other major employer in South Wales, announced it was going to shut Port Talbot, governments at both ends of the M4, sprung into action, and they were able to reverse this decision. Compare that to today, where actually we've seen the Welsh government, obviously in a state of shock. They didn't see this coming. Greg Clark, the Secretary for Business, has been nowhere to be seen at all.
Well, you, until very recently, and Greg Clark were joined at the hip. You were in a position to actually do something about this until 2 months ago. The warnings were there with Honda and everything else. Should you have stepped in more quickly? The Tata example is very clear.
Well, Kirsty, Ford, in fact, Steve Armstrong, the head of Ford Europe, had warned about the consequences of Brexit 3 years ago. When he
was very clear today, though, that he said that this particular closure has got nothing to do with Brexit.
And I will say this, that there is the management of Ford, led by him, and Madeleine Hallwood and others are, in my opinion, absolutely first class. However, this is a business that's been changed by the change of technology. The plant is amazing. It has more than 10 million parts coming in and out the country all the time. So the Brexit situation must be overhanging. It must be there in the fear that this couldn't continue without adding extra costs on friction and tariffs or time delays and everything.
But it was also the case that they were supplying engines for Jaguar Land Rover, going through its own problems, and so the demand for engines were reducing. The question is, should you have thought earlier about the fact that the investment in the car industry in the last year halved, 50% reduction of investment? The alarm bell should have been ringing then.
Well, it's certainly true that investment has dropped dramatically since the referendum. The government, give the government credit, and I'm not part of it, but I'm a big fan of Greg Clark and what BEIS has done, has invested hundreds of millions of pounds in battery technology, for example, in the Faraday Battery Challenge, and other research and development projects. But the fact remains, our car industry is here because of the single market, because of access to 500 million people, and we might not have that.
A fair point, backed up by Carolyn Fairbairn of the CBI, who says this uncertainty for businesses leading to not quite a failure of business, but actually a downturn in business.
Uncertainty around Brexit is a big problem for business. I don't know any Brexiteer who would argue otherwise. And, if the situation were better politically and Brexit had been sorted by the 29th of March, we would have more clarity and there'd be more certainty. So I don't take issue with this point that Brexit uncertainty is affecting business, but that is not what has happened in Bridgend today. And this is the really critical point for the workers there who are facing losing their jobs. We need to be honest about why that plant is closing and not just blame it on Brexit.
But the European director of Ford also today, having said that this decision wasn't as a result of Brexit, said that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, he could not ensure what would happen elsewhere to Ford in the UK.
We're hearing a lot of that from big companies. Frankly, a lot of them like the cushy position being in the European Union of knowing exactly what the regulations are, making it harder often for smaller players to get into the field.
You would say cushy, but actually just clear, which helps business.
Yeah, no, clarity is very important. But let's also recognize it's a lot of big business that's speaking out in favor of the European Union, less so when it comes to small business. But to the point about Bridgend, this isn't just a matter of months. There have been concerns about this plant for over a decade. People knew that it was slowing down and that once Ford decided to build certain cars in certain different areas and the production lines were changing, that this plant was vulnerable. And the idea that it had anything to do with Brexit or Trump or tariffs, which was, 3 years ago, not 10, I think is very misleading.
You said earlier that there was a complete surprise locally with the local management, but that can't be the case.
Which is incredible, isn't it?
But that can't be the case.
I agree. The writing on the wall has been there, absolutely. There's a sheer failure of politics.
What should have been done? Because if you remember, Mrs Thatcher memorably said at Ravenscraig, if you prop up one lame duck, you prop up 100 lame ducks.
Well, look, it's right that there is a massive transition going on in this industry as it moves to electrification. And feel like we're seeing a space race worldwide as countries are investing in platforms for that. The German government has just put 500 million euros into investing into that transition. We're not in the race now, and that's why we face the loss of our car industry.
That's really, if I could politely disagree with you, because I agree with a lot of things you said. And with R&D, we are in the race. But the fact is, this is a volume business. And the big business that Kate, I'm afraid, is quite scathing about, saying, oh, they're in cahoots with the EU. They're the ones that employ hundreds of thousands of people with very well-paid jobs, like Ford, like Toyota, like Mini in Oxford. And these cannot be replaced by small businesses.
The Tata example proves, right? When the political will is there, you can reverse a decision. Is the political will there in the British government to reverse this decision?
And in fact, was that played out by the turnaround in Tata Fortunes, which is actually doing well at the moment?
Well, Tata is a different matter. The steel business is there are similarities. It's a low-margin, high-volume business. I will accept that. But I think we have to accept, whatever, it's easy to blame politicians, but there's fundamental changes in the automotive market.
So a no-deal Brexit, for someone who supports staying within the European Union and resigned your position over the question of Brexit, do you think a no-deal Brexit would kill the car industry stone dead in the United Kingdom?
I think a no-deal Brexit would be a total and absolute disaster. I did vote to leave. I voted to leave 3 times for the Prime Minister's deal. But as long as there's a customs arrangement that allows frictionless trade with regulatory alignment so that businesses can continue as they have, I'm happy with. But I do say that no deal will be a total and absolute disaster. And politicians that pretend that business can be as normal, after March 29th, we'd have been gone by now. We could have been gone with anarchy and chaos.
Kate, you say that you have some sympathy with the position about the uncertainty of Brexit.
Absolutely.
But are you convinced that a no-deal Brexit would not be so bad for manufacturing that's left in the United Kingdom?
I'm not an advocate of a no-deal Brexit. A free trade agreement, I think, is extremely important for the UK to secure with the EU, even before it looks to the United States. But this idea that I'm scathing about big business isn't true. I just don't see the need for the taxpayer to prop it up if it is in an industry that is declining. And to your point about how Tata Steel was recovered because of political action, let's tackle the elephant in the room. It was subsidies, it was taxpayer money propping up an industry that we've just seen recently in the past few weeks between Tata and also British Steel is struggling, and we have to be honest with those workers about their future.
Isn't that the case, Adam? Right. So what you have to do is plan for the post-Ford world, because if you cannot sell cars, you cannot keep a plant open.
Well, look, I think the role of government is to take a long-term view. Companies will often take short-term decisions based on commercial considerations and ignore the long-term consequences. And there, particularly when industries are going through rapid transition, there is a role for government to say, let's co-invest in trying to actually create that platform for future growth. And that's unfortunately, despite the Green Paper, which was excellent, unfortunately there's been a complete lack of delivery because Brexit has captured all of the political attention.
Thank you all very much indeed.